Hey guys, it's Bailey Wiki, and I'm going to show you something really cool today. This is for Dungeon Draft users. If you like to design maps, we're going to use a new system that I've developed. It's actually started in Foundry with some AI generated tiles that I have created over the last few months, and we are going to use these in Dungeon Draft. So I ported the whole system over, and we're going to turn on our terrain brush. We're going to open up all of our layers. We are using smooth blending mode, and we're just going to mix and match a few of these different tiles. And you can see what we're doing is we're creating a very detailed and varied terrain, just painting a couple of brushes on here. So this is a really powerful system. When you want to create good terrains and good backgrounds, it's really hard to do that in Dungeon Draft with just very repetitive textures. And so what I'm calling these are rich textures. These are very large to help avoid repeatability. And you can see, you can mix and match them in different ways. And you can essentially paint your environment very, very quickly while still maintaining this density of detail, right? And the way this works is these are all tileable images. I used Midjourney and a bunch of other sources and a lot of post-processing to create these textures that are tileable, and that's what makes them useful inside of Dungeon Draft. And you can see here, we've created a nice little map in just a few seconds where we can scale this thing up and down, and we can put buildings on it and all sorts of other things. But the aesthetics to time ratio is off the charts. So let's create another one. In this case, I'm going to use this rocky terrain. You can see like this is just a mass of rocks. What could we possibly do with this? Well, there's other things inside of this set, and the set is available to you now. It's on my Patreon. And you'll see a lot of development with this system here going forward. But in this case, I'm picking a liquid texture. This is just one of the ocean textures. And I'm just going to follow the artwork of the rock. And I'm going to paint around it. And we're just going to keep following this around because I wanted to take this rock and turn it into something that might be on the ocean. And I'm going to increase or decrease the size of my brush to get closer or further from the rock. I'm going to start by just getting approximately close to it. And you can see already it's carving the rock out, and it's creating this, it's using just the natural textures to create this difference between the water and the rock itself. Now I'm going to tighten up my brush even more. I'm just going to go around and get close to again, the artwork of the rock. But you could spend all day in Dungeon Draft and not create this level of detail. And that's part of what we're doing here. Now we're switching to another type of ocean texture. And this is just going to give us the ability to all of a sudden magically make it look like there's a shallow portion of this, right? Something you'd expect to see as the water is approaching the rock. Now we're going to switch to this rock texture. It doesn't really matter which one. I just grabbed one that looked maybe like it was going to be close to this. And now we're going to shape this rock. We're essentially flattening it out because we're erasing the details of the texture. And you can see already we've created a flattened sort of peninsula. And we'll change our rock around till we get something that we think matches the artwork. This one looks good. Now to create a little bit more variability, we'll grab another kind of rock and just sort of pepper it in there. Just kind of merge these together. We'll look at where the artwork could be deleted. And this is already pretty effective. You can imagine a castle sitting on here, or like I built a lighthouse. And now I want to expose some of that rock. I don't want it to be so flat. So I'm going to go back in and I'm going back to the same rock I started with. I'm just exposing a little bit of the artwork. And again, just like magic, it looks like it's coming up and it's three-dimensional. And I'm just painting around. I'm hitting Control Z to back out of things. I just want to see where the natural rock is and expose it. And I want to do it in a way that doesn't look too repetitive. And look at that. I've got this nice flat surface, but I've also got three-dimensional elements coming off of it. And I did this, if you haven't been watching, this is in real time. Very, very quick. So let's say I didn't want it to be on the ocean. Let's change some of these textures on the fly. All of a sudden, this same peninsula is in a sea of lava. So I have all these other liquid textures you can use to mix and match, and you'll see more coming out over the next few months. If I just change the lighting for the scene, all of a sudden, I've transformed this with a couple of clicks. And this is the power of the system. If you're designing in Dungeon Draft, to create a really, really beautiful scene starts with how you create the terrain around it. So now we've got this great scene. I could create it here, or I could just export the scene, and I could just do a scene comparison using the compare levels tool on Dungeon Draft. I could draw this little building on a separate scene altogether. But you can see I'm using the terrain to inspire my design. I could make this simple little tower into anything. But that's another big thing about the system is you get these rich terrains, and then they actually inspire you to figure out what lives in the scene, right? Again, use our inner Bob Ross. What's going to live here? And now I'm using some of Epsilon's textures, which are great. They work well with this system as well. And you can see already I've got a really great looking scene, the start of one, right? Now I can populate the inside of it. So I just wanted to show you what these things look like as you start to put them together. It's all really great too, because you can build these terrains, put them into something like Foundry or Roll20, and then drop in other tiles on top of them and prefabs and things like that if you've used some of my systems. It's very, very flexible. Let's take another example. Let's take this snow scene. You see, it's just a big old mess of rocks. We're going to grab one of these simple textures. We call these basic textures versus rich textures. And we're just going to look at the artwork and we're going to start to paint around it. We can get close-ish to some of these rocks. And you can see, just as if by magic, we have taken a very rocky scene and we're now making it ready for other storytelling. I'm going to carve some paths down here and just getting it sort of approximately close to these rocks. And we're painting in a way that it makes, the transition believable. Let's make a little flat area over here. I imagine this might be a battlefield, or I can make a little town, or I might just leave it empty and maybe put a cave in somewhere. You can see I'm just creating these flat tops to what wasn't flat a second ago. I'm just carving some little channels to connect them. And that's how easy this is. And look at the level of detail. You literally couldn't create this in Dungeon Draft, right? But by the power of AI and just being deliberate about how some of these assets are designed, we have the ability to do this. Now I'm shrinking my brush and I'm just going over some of the rocks to give them more definition, right? Because you can take out some definition as you're painting over them. But that was, again, about a couple minutes. We've got a really, really compelling backdrop. Give you some more examples here. Just show you some of these. Here's some Badlands. Right, you can make different desert environments. Just an example of that detail that you can get with these cracks in the ground. Here we've got something that might be an oasis, but we need to add some things to it, right, and take out some of that repetitive water. So we'll turn on smooth blending, unlock all of our slots, and we will just kind of start drawing and covering up some of that extra area with some of these sand dunes. Okay, pretty good start. I also have what I call settlement textures. And these are towns. Here's a desert town. We just start painting it in. Look at that. And we'll make our brush nice and small. We'll just start to go around the edges of these buildings just to find the edge of the building and stop. And we let the textures guide our design. Right? And all of a sudden we have a little settlement on the edge of this oasis. And we can blow this map up as big as we want when we get into BTT, right? We can have it be explorable by our tokens. Here we're just going to create some buffer between the sand dunes and the town itself just by using the basic texture for sand. And there's so many great artists with great textures like Tom Kartos and Epsilon and others that you can use that whole palette to form these maps any way that you want. There's a lot of options in here I won't go through, but you can have jungle and forest and snowy forest and evil forest. And I'll show you, you also have these chromatic options here. If you drop the intensity down very, very low, we're going to use black in this case. And you want it to be very low because otherwise it'll overpower the terrains you've already got in place. But you can see we're starting to darken the terrain underneath. I wanted to show you this because you do have other chromatic textures in the same pack. And you can use them to, use like green to make your sea look a little bit greener as it gets more shallow. In this case, we're using black to just bring out more of the highlights, accentuate more of the lowlights, make this a little bit darker. And if we switch it over, you can see how much it changes things. So this lets you alter the color of some of these textures, really get some fine tuning. And here you can see we're painting this a little bit more cooled lava out any direction that we want. It gives you a lot of flexibility. With this pack, you also get this test map, and you can see all the different layers and kind of deconstruct how I designed a lot of these things. But I also include objects. So these are objects that I use in BTT. And they give you the ability to just create certain types of topography within a map, right? Some of them work better than others with different types of backgrounds. You can move them into corners. And you can see, again, more examples. But here's how you create just a big gaping hole right in the middle of a map that you created. You've got options to just drop in grassy areas, right? If we go to some of these other sample maps, you can see here's one that use some of these objects to create a cool little area. You can just drop it and all of a sudden you've got grassy clearing with some boulders around it. Here's some overgrowth where you can just kind of spam these in as objects and create an area that has overgrowth around it. Maybe it's a place that you want to be inaccessible or difficult terrain. I also have little objects like these paths. You can just drop them in and all of a sudden you've got paths of different types. Different dirt roads. You even got the ability to drop in bodies of water. Right here's some ponds. You can add rivers. These are all objects. They're also available, the rivers are also available as patterns. So you can make these rivers very large and stretch across the whole scene, whereas the objects only have so far that they can scale. Circles of rocks that you can drop in different places. Very, very flexible, very quick to add in and it's helping do the storytelling as you're playing around with the assets themselves. You even have these components here that went into making this gorge, for example. You can see it's just a few of those objects put in end to end, and it makes a very compelling canyon. Let's just show you how fun this is to work with. We're going to change that top layer to, let's go with jungle. All of a sudden we have a canyon in the middle of a jungle. And maybe we want to change the bottom of the canyon to something different. There's over 100 textures in here to play with. So all of a sudden we have a river running through the canyon. Or maybe it's lava. There's only 8 brushes here, but turn on our terrain layer. Actually, this way, in this one, we're gonna go with the pattern. So we're on our pattern, don't even have our terrain layer turned on. We're gonna turn on snap to grid, and we're gonna drag this pattern out as far as we want. And we're gonna look for a part of this pattern that we want to make a map from. And we're going to grab, then we're just going to use the same pattern. We're going to draw out a square. Just the area that we care about. We're going to delete the original pattern. I don't know, maybe we want to see if there's another pattern that exposes itself. Look, here's a new one I wasn't planning on, but it's zoomed in on the same area. I really like it, right? It looks like a road in the middle of the desert. So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to expand it out because these things scale really well. Again, they're high density. And look at this detail. You can, like, in a second, creating a map with this really, really rich detail. Right? And we're letting it inform what kind of scene this might be. And we've got a road through the desert. It's got these areas that are up high. But because we can't paint on it, it's a pattern, we're going to go use an AOA asset called Frost. It's free. You can get it on Cartography Assets. And we're just going to grab a color from the top of this little rock here, and we're going to make it semi-transparent. And we're just going to start spamming that frost, it's colorable, around the top of this rock. And you can see in the same way that we painted earlier with terrains, we're basically just covering up some of that artwork and we're flattening the top of this rock because maybe I want a building to go up here or a campsite. I'm going to make sure my pattern stretches all the way across. It's just a little hack to be able to form this terrain. I'm going to make another version just a little bit darker. Spam that around just to give my texture a little bit more variability up here. And just like that, we've got a flat area to design with. And we'll do the same thing down here. Just erasing very simply the original artwork in order to create flat planes to design with. And that's it. A couple of minutes and we've got a very, very compelling background to work with. I'll just give you an example of how to build here. I'm using this terrain to inform the shape of this building, right? That's another power of the system. It gives you inspiration to do something that you normally wouldn't have designed. And I'm doing this in a really fast and dirty way. You wouldn't want to do this with your shadows and other things. Notice everything's at the wrong level. I want to move all of my objects back to -400 because why not give myself all of the space to design with. I'm also going to move the terrain itself back to -400. Now that exposes my building in a way that I can get in and design it. Again, I wouldn't normally do this with my shadows. You got all those little hedgehog effects in there, but it just shows you like really quickly here's now a building set into this beautiful terrain. If we explore a little bit more, give you some inspiration on what you could design with. Some of these, like this, is designed as farmland is designed to go with the settlement, so you can create farmland around your settlements. Settlements are, scale specific, right? Whereas a lot of these just general terrains could be any scale, right? Let's just mix and match now some options here. Turn on our smooth blending, unlock all of our brush options, go to 8. And now we just want to get rid of some of the repeatability, right? Make this look a little bit more random. We're just testing out some of the, what they call the grassy brushes. You can see great detail, great randomness with just a couple of brush strokes. Here's a nice sort of vegetation overgrowth. Very, very fast, very compelling. You can see the stories start to take shape here. We've got this area in the middle. Well, what could be in there? Well, here's another settlement. This is for ruins. I can just paint ruins here. This could also be a cemetery. Just trying different brushes to see how the story takes shape, right? There's these ruins that are sitting in the middle of this clearing. This happens to be where your players find themselves. But maybe it's not ruins, right? I'm trying swamp. Trying some stone. Maybe there's a stone clearing. I might put a circle of stones in there to serve as a backdrop. It's so easy, just a couple of clicks or Control Z and change back to something else. There's an evil wood. Maybe there's a fort, more of a forest in the middle, right? Might not be accessible. Maybe it's just a clearing of grass, right? I wanted this to be a campsite. A little bit richer texture grass. Here's one with a river going through it. And it shows me there's a river. Now if I explore it and I start to paint with it, I can see that I can make that river stretch. And I just go back to one of my other paints and I paint over the area of the river I don't want to be exposed. I'm just going to explore this river as it travels to the other side of the map. Just like that, have a nice water feature going right through the middle of my map. I've only used 5 textures at this point. Just making these rocks and areas of the river a bit more defined. I'm going to start experimenting with just changing other parts, other brushes, right? So now I've got a very green scene. Put some hills here around the edges. I like that. Create some good tactical interest here. I can hide enemies back there and that sort of thing. Just going to run over them, make them a little bit more defined where they start to meet with the other brushes. Just make sure the hills don't look like they're fading in weird ways. And for my next brush, I feel like I just draw a path going through this. And I'm just going to follow the terrain, let it guide me. This really helps you create more randomized terrains because the textures themselves have the randomization. That's another benefit of AI, is it randomizes things in ways that humans don't do very well. But these are already randomized in great ways, right? So if we just follow these terrains, it helps us draw better maps. change it to a little bit lighter color, and I've got a pretty good map here. Great foundation. Notice there's not big trees and things like that. I want to be able to add trees and other large elements in the BTT afterwards, right? Helps make sure that these textures are more flexible. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoy this new system. Be on the lookout for more great stuff coming here over the next few months. And let me know in the comments how you get along with it. And in the meantime, have fun making your maps.